Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. Oh, look. What? Okay. Okay, what? Okay. Okay, so what we have is a photograph that somebody made from the audience onto a small stage with a black, black, black curtain. What really pops, well, one of the things that tells me is that whoever made the photograph did it with a camera or whatever that accidentally focused on the US flag in the background, because that's in super sharp focus. So seems to be one or two flags. There's one flag which is US flag, and I don't know the flag next to it.
U.S. Department of State.
Okay, US Department of State. On the left is a woman looking to her left who is speaking from a kind of a podium. And there's a woman at the podium, both looking at each other almost like peers. Fascinating. I'll let you give. I'll leave a bit of a cliffhanger to say who. Okay, this is a really dramatic photo. So what am I looking at?
So that's me at the podium. And
Yep.
This is March 2009. It's Women's History Month at the U.S.
wow.
Department of State.
Wow.
And the organization of which I was the president and a founder was having our Women's History Month Day celebration. And the woman seated is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Boom.
Yep. So I would say because of my career, which is my diplomatic career, I had fabulous opportunities to meet presidents and prime ministers and Hillary Clinton and many other incredible people. So that is a big chunk of my life. 33 years of my professional life was as a diplomat.
As it happens, I moved back from Hong Kong to Canada. So now I'm in Vancouver. I just spent I met a few times with a cousin, and his father was a diplomat. And so that's how, when we first met, it was in Ottawa. His dad was a diplomat. And so my experience of that whole world is obviously from many steps removed. But then when you say that, okay, so where do we go from, we just opened an incredibly amazing door. So I'm going to leave it to you. I'm just going to get out of the way. Please take over.
So I went to graduate school to get my MFA in creative writing. And I had previously studied journalism at my state university in the summer times. So I really thought I was going to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my mind was set, and that's what I thought I was doing. But life gets in the way, and I figured out pretty quickly I had to have a paycheck.
Mm.
So then it was, well, what am I going to do for a career? Not a job, but a career, because I wanted to have an actual career. And many twists and turns, but I ended up taking the Foreign Service exam, which is given, in those days was given once a year. Mm-hmm. It took me about 3 years from the time I decided to do this until I was offered a job. Wow. And I was incredibly lucky because the number of diplomats is very small. Mm-hmm. So I'm impressed that you have a relative who is a diplomat, because most people have absolutely no idea what diplomats do. Mm-hmm. And if they have a impression of them, it's that they're going to cocktail parties all the time, and
it's from the movies.
And yes, it's living a good life, and etc., which is so wrong an impression of what diplomats do that I always am trying, even now after I've retired, to talk when I can about diplomacy, because it's so important, and particularly right now because of the situation in Europe with the Ukraine.
Yeah.
So people don't understand diplomacy. They understand what the military does. They usually have a brother, a father, a son, someone who's been in the military, so they've gotten firsthand accounts of that, but they haven't met or talked with a diplomat. So it's kind of my continuing goal to tell people what diplomats do. Nice. And that profession has allowed me to travel the world. I had a relative by marriage who used to say that he got an all expenses all expenses paid trip to Europe. And of course, what he was talking about was World War II. So in my case, I got an all expenses paid trip to most of the world thanks to my job.
Wow. So one of the missions of the podcast is to inspire listeners, right? It's to inspire people to realize, okay, we have one life. How do we make every second count? Because, life is a gift. You got a master's in creative writing. So
Right.
my first degree was in creative writing. And I know that when a child comes to their parent and say, I want to go study creative writing, and you can imagine, like, my parents wanted me to become a doctor and a lawyer, first generation Canadians. And I was good in science, but then when I turned to them, I said, you know what? The thinking going on in the creative writing class is much higher than the thinking going on in like the physics and chemistry classes. So that's where I'm going. They were pretty disappointed. And then you go for a master's, and then you say that life got in the way. Well, maybe what it was that the training you got in creative writing actually supported you becoming a very accomplished diplomat. Maybe. I don't know.
No, I think you're absolutely right on that. I've always said that the humanities and the humanities degree teaches you critical thinking and good writing. And those are two skills that any diplomat has to have. So my humanities, both my undergraduate and then my master's degree, prepared me for the career. And by the way, as a diplomat, you write extensively all the time because you're reporting back to Washington and it's usually in written form. And in my case, because of my specialty, I was writing speeches for the ambassador. I was writing briefing memos. I was writing press releases for the media. I was doing all of that. But it's professional writing. It's nonfiction professional writing. It's not the kind of creative writing that you do in a MFA course. So I was writing for the whole 33 years, but not the kind of writing. Well, I did my master's thesis. I did short stories. That's what went into my master's thesis. So it was different writing.
Right.
But I totally agree. As part of my master's degree program, I was, as a teaching fellow is what they call it, I was teaching freshmen and sophomores. And they would come over and I'd ask them what they were doing in their whatever other classes. It was mainly multiple choice and that kind of tests.
Yeah.
Whereas in my class, they had to write 6 essays a semester, plus a midterm and final with essays. So they had to write. But the other professors in other disciplines weren't requiring that.
So I have 2 questions I have to ask. Okay, so Hillary Clinton at that point, you'll have to remind me, what was her title?
Secretary of State.
She was Secretary of State. Okay. And so can you remember that precise moment of whoever made that photograph? Maybe what you were exchanging with her about, just to give us some flavor of what your presentation was.
Well, it was her first year. It was first March that she was Secretary of State. So we were thrilled that she agreed to be our keynote speaker for Women's History Month. And I was the president of the organization. So I was there to introduce her. And also at the end of the program, we gave her a plaque about leadership. It's a beautiful quote that we had on leadership. And so she got up and talked about her experiences as a woman, first in a law firm in Arkansas and so forth. And it was very interesting to hear. She's a few years older than I am, but not much, about what it was like to be a woman in a law firm. Because some of the things she talked about, I could say happened to me too, being the only woman in the room, having to ask them to make decisions about your career that you didn't have to make before because they didn't have women.
Sure.
So it was all very interesting, and I know everyone in the room was fascinated to hear what her background is and how she related to women coming up in a man's profession. There are, unfortunately, some women who experience that, who think they're super women, and they did it, and they're not very sympathetic.
It's magic.
They made it in a man's world, so everybody else should make it in a man's world.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
With no help. Whereas I believe we have a responsibility to help younger women navigate. So, and she very much was in that line. She said, at her first law firm that she had to. She asked them what their maternal policy was, their policy for maternal leave. So there was none.
Mm-hmm.
So, the senior partner she
Wow.
was talking to asked her to design one.
Yeah.
So she had to write a policy and then try to get it approved.
Wow. I know we could easily lose ourselves in this one photo. You're very tricky. You're very, very tricky. Okay, so the one other question I want to ask was you wanted to, and maybe the other photographs do this, but just for now, you said you wanted to help dispel or at least raise or increase people's awareness of what diplomacy really is. And I know we can't do it within an hour, let alone 15 minutes or so that I have for each photo, but what is the message is there a message you want to give about diplomacy to help people get their minds around it?
I guess the overall message is American citizens, at least, and I'm sure Canadian citizens too, get their money's worth out of their diplomats.
Mm-hmm.
We are not a 9-to-5 profession, and our informal motto is that we're the first line of defense. Mm-hmm. We're out there in all kinds of countries that tourists don't go. Mm-hmm. And we are there for a reason, to represent U.S. interests. So we do everything we can to represent the United States and to help American citizens who frequently, unfortunately, find themselves in need of help. Yeah. Whether it's they lose their passport or they get arrested or they have a health issue and they have to go to a hospital. They don't know the system. They don't know the language. They don't know how to navigate anything. Who do they call? It's like Ghostbusters, except it's who do they call? You call your embassy for help. Yep. And we are love to help our citizens, to do everything we can. So that's helping our citizens. But then there's this whole other aspect, which is being the representative of the United States government in a foreign country. Yeah. And so what we have to do is to project Americans' values and interests, but also to understand the country we're living in and report that back to Washington. So sometimes, or to wherever your capital is. Mm. So this is, we're boots on the ground. We're the first boots on the ground. It's not the military. The diplomats are already there and already reporting if the military then comes in. And so it can be a very dangerous job. Mm. And diplomats do lose their lives. In fact, more ambassadors have been killed in the line of duty than generals since World War II. And most of us go to these dangerous places because we know somebody has to go, and so we volunteer. In my case, I volunteered, and I went to Colombia twice, working in the narcotics affairs section, which is anti-narcotics work.
You're not that ambitious. You're fine.
Well, the first time is during the years of Pablo Escobar and the Cali and Medellin cartel, and it was
in Hebrew, you've been to Israel. You say as you went to the juice of the garbage. So in the garbage bag you have the juice inside. That is really where it is at. That was where you went.
Yeah. Well, it was a joke in my family. My brother said wherever I went, revolution broke out.
Yeah, wow.
But it was the other way around, really. The revolution broke out, and then I went. I volunteered to go. So.
Okay. Well, should we go on to the next photo?
Sure.
So, is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So, if you like what you've seen, and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.